You're listening to The Foundation of Wellness, a refreshing take on diet and lifestyle, with Jessica Dogert, a registered dietitian nutritionist, and Marisa Moon, a primal health coach.
Hey you guys, my name is Jessica and I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, and you can learn all about me on my website at jessicadogert.com.
Hey, what's going on, you guys? This is Marisa Moon. I'm a certified primal health coach and intermittent fasting coach. You can learn more about me at marisamoon.com.
So today we have a guest that we are both totally fangirling over. She's incredibly insightful, intelligent, and real. And her name is Tiffany Louise. She's a professional coach, a speaker, and author, and she is a licensed clinical social worker.
Oh, yes. I am so pumped for this interview, you guys. Tiffany provides transformative coaching to individuals and groups, and she's a contributor to all these publications, including Shape and Women's Health, Huffington Post, Fox News. We could keep going. She's obtained her master's degree in clinical social work with an emphasis in behavioral health, and she has 17 years of experience working as a therapist and coach. She's trained as a psychotherapist with a focus on cognitive behavioral therapies. And she spent a decade working in the field of addictions and mental health in some of the leading treatment centers in this country. Now, Tiffany draws from her personal experience and all her experience in the field, thousands of counseling hours to inform her non-clinical coaching practice. And her passion and life's work is to support others in creating their healthiest, happiest, most spiritually connected lives. Tiffany, how's it going? Welcome to the Foundation of Wellness.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. You hear people like introduce you and you're like, really? All of that? It's been a long time, but I'm so happy to be here and chat with you ladies and bring our online love affair, a little bit more in real life with this conversation.
Tiffany, we are so excited that you're here with us today, and you must be buzzing around life right now because you have a brand new book coming out. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's kind of trippy. I just got my shipment of like my 20 authors copies, and I have to open it up later today, and I'm like, is this real life? Is this happening?
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I can tell you a little bit about how it came to be, but it's been a spiritual experience, and I'm excited that my first book is actually a tool. So it's a guided journal, and it's a 52-week guided journal. So the idea is that this book becomes yours. It is designed to help people figure out what it is that they truly want, and not just on a surface level, but from a deeper values and core desired feelings level, and then work through any blocks and barriers, resistance, limited beliefs that can come up over the course of a year. So it's designed to be a once-a-week time that you set aside for yourself to reflect on the week past and the one ahead of you. And I really use all of the tools, which are really very simple. I was looking back and like sort of had this story in my head when I first was writing this, like, oh, it's too simple. It's not enough content. But the truth is after all of these years of helping people, what I've really learned is it's that simple repetition that changes our lives. And so these are the questions that I've been asking people for decades, changing their life in terms of addictions and mental health and career goals and relationship goals, you name it. And so all of that's infused in this book, and I'm really excited to share it with people, and hopefully it can change their lives, just like, my favorite books have changed mine.
Wow. I was wondering, do you need to know what you want when you start your journal? Do I need to know what my goal is for the year?
I don't think so, actually. I think it's really, and I don't want to sound too general, like one size fits all, but the first section of the book is really designed to help people sort through what their values really are. Because you would think that we're all operating, in alignment with our values. People think, oh yeah, I know what I want. But oftentimes we don't. Oftentimes we're chasing things that others tell us we want, that society tells us that we want. And when we really ground down into the core and the truth of who we are and what we value most, like maybe it's family. And what I've found for people is when your goals are out of alignment with your values is when you get stuck, right? So a lot of people have these stories, I'm not making progress, I'm lazy, I'm this, I'm that, I can't make it happen. Why am I not going to the gym? Well, there's two things functioning. One is, we're always moving towards something that feels better. And so if we're not taking action, somehow we've created a story that the change is more uncomfortable than where we are. But also sometimes values are in that middle space. And so an example of this is that I use in the book is like, say you want to train for a marathon, but your deepest core value is family. And marathon training takes a lot of time, right? So if you work a full-time job and then you come home at the end of the day and that's your 2 hours to spend with your kids before they go to bed, but you have to use that time to go run, there's a disconnect there, right?
Yeah.
So it's when we find the truth of our values, we can often then design a life and goals in accordance with that. So no, I don't think you have to know your goal. I think by identifying and getting clear on your values, you can actually sort of say, okay, this is what's important to me. How will my behavior changing reflect that more in my life, help me feel more in alignment? And then you can sort of get clearer on your goals more easily, is how I see it, if that makes sense.
Do you have an example for yourself where there was not in alignment in terms of your goals? Like you thought you were going in the right direction, but it was actually something that you had no desire to even be doing in the first place?
Oh my God. F yes. I mean, who hasn't? Let's bring ourselves back to our 20s, right? Which I think is, for me, was the whole time was like chasing things I thought that were important or, really were value systems that were given to me and not really my own. I mean, so much of my early years, and I didn't even know it, right? I don't think we're really conscious of it at that point. We're sort of in survival, right? We're still in that developmental phase where belonging is our primary goal, like finding out who we are, but then belonging in a greater context, like in our peer groups or whatever, right? So in my 20s, I mean, I was so working on being enough for whoever was in front of me, especially in romantic relationships. It was like this proving and this trying and this like shining up my outside so that I was enough. And I think about the time that I wasted running around town thinking about what Halloween costume I was going to be in or what outfit for Friday or Saturday night. I mean, those might not seem like goals, but they ultimately were, right? Wherever your behavior is and wherever you're investing your time, you can see what's important to you. And so at that point in my life, I was just trying to be enough. And until I really got clear on like, what do I believe about myself and what do I believe about this life and where is my energy most valuably placed? Could I really take a step back, lean back, step into my own life and then start to say, hey, am I so worried about him choosing me? Do I even want to choose him? And do I choose me first? So that's, a very general example, but yes, I've chased the wrong things for long periods of time in my life, but it's beautiful lessons and really valuable learning.
Well, what comes to mind when I hear you talking is that you and me and Jessica are all just lucky to be able to realize or chase dreams and aspirations that we have at this time in our lives. But I know that there are so many people who are just going day to day doing things that they feel like they have to do. And they almost don't even take a moment to think about the possibility of reaching any goal that's outside of their normal, just obligatory routine. And so I'm trying to imagine how your journal, imagine this woman receives it as a gift from her caring husband who knows she's spread too thin, and he says she needs to do something for herself. And he reads your post, Tiffany, and he's like, oh my gosh, I want my wife to be inspired with this. I'm going to get her the journal. She gets this journal and she's in a place where she feels like she barely even has time to do anything, and she's just in the grind. How can this work for her?
That's a really great question, because I think I was once perhaps her, right? Everything in my life didn't indicate that on the surface didn't indicate that I could have the life that I have now. And so I had to start where I was in the smallest way possible. And I think that's really, when we think about our goals and like getting from A to Z, that path seems so extraordinarily overwhelming that for that woman who's feeling spread too thin, feeling like she has all of these obligations, and they're real, right? Going to jobs that maybe we don't like because we have to put food on the table and we have to pay our bills and take care of our children or whatever it might be. But what the first step is getting to the core of your truth, right? Who am I? When in the expanse of all of these areas of my life, am I the happiest? When am I the most lit up? What thoughts am I thinking that are creating more discord and more pain and more discomfort in my life? And what thoughts am I thinking that are creating more light, more love, more peace, more contentment? Because no matter what, I think no matter what circumstance we're in, the way we think about it creates how we feel about it. So while she might really be spread too thin, while she might really be overextended, how she thinks about that helps her see whether or not it's a choice that she's behind the driver's seat of. And if she can see it as a bridge and feel like she's choosing it because of where it will get her, and or if she looks at it and says, no, this is not for me, how do I shift my mindset to see it as temporary? And how do I start to take the actions first in my thoughts, then in my feelings and my behavior, to move myself slowly, one step at a time out of this? I mean, for example, so I've, worked in the past for about a decade helping people with addictions. When people come to me and they were in the depths of it, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years into their, addiction, and they're like, how in the world do I ever walk out of this? This is impossible. How do I have a life where I'm experiencing joy and peace and contentment? I can't even imagine that. Sober for the rest of her life is too much to think about. They have to come back to today, and what's the next step for today, and what is the kindest, gentlest, most loving thing for me to do today. And if I'm within this, context of my life, how do I choose the next step that feels that much better? So it can be overwhelming to think about changing some really difficult circumstances, and believe me, I get it. But all I did and all I've seen that is the most effective is focus on now, focus on the next step forward, and before you know it, you've walked out and journeyed to a place where you never could imagine. But if you're so focused on the future, you can't be in today. So it's sort of like thinking of the goal and the long-term goal and the vision. But what I really connect to in the book is what the feeling is. So the truth is anything that we want, we really believe it's going to give us a feeling on the other side, right? So I want this job because I believe when I get it, I will feel proud, accomplished, strong, and, a sense of freedom, right? So what we do is help people get in touch with those feelings now, because this is the truth. Nothing in the research says you get happy once you reach your goal. You get happy in the pursuit of the goal. And you find fulfillment and purpose even when life is tough if you feel like it's purposeful and alignment with what you value. So learning how to tap into those feelings today, even when your goal isn't in front of you, is also a part of that equation. How do I just take the next step, and how do I find those feelings today and not wait for them when I arrive at a certain outcome?
Yeah, that's reminding me, Jessica, you showed me this post from Tiffany about destination addiction. Why don't you talk about that?
Right. So it's basically exactly like what you were talking about. One of my favorite quotes by Abraham Hicks is, the reason that you want every single thing that you want is because you think that you're going to feel really good when you get there. But if you don't feel really good on your way to there, you can't get there. You have to be satisfied with what is while you're reaching for more. And something on your social media that you've written was to be careful of destination addiction, just the idea that happiness is in the next place, the next job, or even the next partner. So until you give up the idea that happiness is somewhere else, it will never be right where you are.
Yeah, I mean, God, I get goosebumps just hearing both of those things. And like, isn't this the truth? Right? And isn't this, I think, our spiritual journey in this lifetime, to learn to be not only just okay, but so incredibly grateful and appreciative and trusting in what is. I have to say, I have not done this perfectly. There have been times in my career where I'm like, really? Still here? Still doing this? Are you kidding me? Like, when's the break coming? But the truth is I really think that a big degree, one thing that really contributes to some of the success that I've had, and by success, I mean peace and joy in my life, and ability to impact other people, is my ability to be joyful in the in-between. I can look back and think, I did a lot of years paying my dues, but I knew there was purpose there, and I wasn't waiting to get a book or to, publish a blog or to be on Fox News or wherever it is to feel like it was enough and it mattered. And I think that really comes down to, for me, my spiritual beliefs, because that's really what these quotes are about. Like, how can you find joy through whatever is greater than you and the connection that you have in this life right where you are? And how can you be satisfied and trust that this is divinely orchestrated for your highest good? And that's easier said than done sometimes, but boy, is that where all the joy is in this life.
When you say it like that, it sounds so perfect and real, and that's what we want to experience. But I know personally, I've struggled with the monotony of daily tasks, and I've looked to actually Buddhist philosophy because they are all about being in the present moment. And I found this book at the library when I was avoiding a work task I was supposed to be doing on my laptop, browsing the aisles of the library. I see this book called Buddha Standard Time, and it's all about just, getting rid of the mindset where every daily task is a means to an end and everything is goal oriented, and really being intentional with every task that gets you there, even if it's just putting your laundry away or it's, finishing. I'm sure, Tiffany, you must have had so many like miniature assignments to finally get to the point where you finish a book. And there must have been so many times where you just have to do it. And even though this is your passion and your love and something you truly want, you can't force creativity, but you also had a deadline. And I'm sure in those moments, if you weren't entirely present, your work would suffer. And in the end, you just become anxious, don't you?
I totally agree. And I think it's the book really truthfully didn't take me that long to write because it's a guided journal and there's a lot of repetition of the prompts, but I can relate to what you were saying in the preparation to get the opportunity to write the book. So I actually just stepped away from my full-time job. I was running my coaching business and my full-time job for about 3 years at the same time. And back in August, I stepped away and was like, okay, I'm ready to go. My business is built to the point where this is sustainable. And I quit my job. And within 2 weeks, I had a email in my inbox asking me if I wanted to write a book for this publisher.
Wow.
And so, and I love this conversation because I've gotten a lot of flack and also a lot of support, but I've talked pretty openly about my feelings about sort of hustling. And that's something that has come up, in my life, is like, I just refuse to have this idea that we have to be in this relentless, ego-based, burning the candle at both ends energy to be successful. And the truth is what had happened is I had done the work. I had showed up for the monotony of life for a decade, right? I had been in addiction for that long. I had been working in a job that I got a great deal of personal satisfaction and purpose out of. But, we know my line of work. It's just like you're not paid enough to even pay off your student loans, and it's a difficult job. I said I always had to train like for a spiritual marathon every day. I had to take such incredible care of myself to be able to have the bandwidth to show up in that capacity every day. But I did it. And I did it when there was nobody knowing, when it was completely confidential and no one could know the work that I was doing. I couldn't tell anybody about the successes. I couldn't share my client accolades. But I did it because it was the right thing. It was the the way I was supposed to serve. And I did it trusting that if I showed up and trusted my path and I listened, to my higher power, I stayed longer than I thought I would, but I didn't get that knowing in my heart to leave. And who knows the multitude of reasons for that. Maybe I was there for a couple more clients who really needed me. Maybe I was there to help a coworker. Maybe it had less to do with me, right? Why I stayed as long as I did. But I showed up for all of the unsexy, uncool, no social media likes for this part of my career. And yet the universe rewarded me with this opportunity. I had a story was going to be so hard to achieve and was going to take so much work. It did take work, but not in a forcing it to make it happen way, in a being faithful in the day in, day out of my life, knowing that I was serving a greater good. So it sort of relates to what you're saying. We all, and I think our culture really plays into this, like, unless you're 30 under 30 on the Forbes list, like being successful so early, so soon. And we have this idea that it happens overnight, but I don't know anybody who has anything worth saying that is instantly successful. And I don't know anybody who has anything, especially in our line of work, right? You ladies know this. You've done the work to educate yourself, to work on your craft, and to know your shit, basically. And until we do that, until we really have something to offer, and until we are able to humble ourselves in the process, I think we block a lot of those bigger blessings. So for me, doing the work to get to a goal, showing up to the gym and doing those workouts when you don't feel like it, for me, building a website because I had no money to do it and hire anybody, and I had no freaking idea what I was doing, and, watching YouTube videos to figure out how to do everything. Like, that's where it's unsexy and uncool. But I think if you can find joy in that, you are vibrating on that frequency where you are calling things to you. You're in flow rather than making things happen. The universe rises up to meet you. So that is, I think, the power of finding joy even in the mundane. I mean, it happened to me the other day. It was like 2 degrees here in Michigan. I was in the parking lot. My LaCroix was falling out of the cold shopping cart. Wind and snow was whipping me in the face. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, this sucks. And I was like, shut up. And not in a mean way. Like, I really believe in having a passion for yourself, but I was like, get a grip. The reason that you're here in the parking lot in the middle of the day is because you have a business that allows you this freedom.
Yeah.
And how grateful that you have food in a shopping cart, and how grateful that you have a car with a remote start. I mean, so really this practice of coming back to like the simple gratitude for the unsexy parts of life, because frankly, that's where most of life is. And if you spend your life waiting for those mountaintops, but you don't learn to love the climb, you're going to be miserable most of your life, is kind of how I see it.
So when you're talking about success and how I feel like a lot of, our generation now just wants this immediate success and we want everything right now. But something that really inspires me about you is a quote that you have on your Instagram: no mess, no message, no test, no testimony. And I feel like that kind of explains the fact that like we have to go through really difficult times, right? And we have to like learn all about ourselves and like what we can bring to the table so that we can help others. And that takes time, right?
Sure does. It sure does. And, I was thinking about that. Like, I was trying to think of somebody who I really look up to or aspire to, create something of what they have in my own life that hasn't had a struggle. I always say no one who's great has a story that goes, it was all perfect, the end. And I'm so grateful and excited for those people who've really had lives of not a whole lot of struggle. I think there are a handful of them out there. But for the most part, the people that we really look up to and are inspired by are people who have overcome. People who can have that hero's journey, a story of hope, a story of I've been there and let me show you what it's like on the other side and talk about how I got here. So yeah, I think, and those things do take time. I think we have this idea, I'm going to take a course and I'm going to get my business up and running and I'm going to suddenly, make 7 figures, right. in 6 months. And while for some people that happens, I don't find that those people happen so quickly that it's sustainable. And so my goal, above all else, is peace. I think until you've had a life where you've lost your peace, you don't really realize how important it is. I'm not willing to sacrifice that for anything. I'm not willing to say yes to a project or anything that's going to affect my relationship to myself, my higher power, or anybody else. And I've fought hard for that. So I have a wisdom that comes from the struggle or the suffering that gives me that knowing. And I wouldn't trade, I can say this honestly at this point in my life, any of the difficult lessons I've had to learn, because every single one has anointed me or blessed me or, put me in a position to teach or help somebody else. And it's ultimately led to greater happiness in my life. So yeah, I do think we all want it in an instant, and we don't want to do the hard work. And I totally get why that's happening. We all have those issues and the wounds, and we're just looking for a quick Band-Aid. We're looking for a quick, I'm enough. If I get this book or I get this podcast deal or whatever it is, then suddenly that means I'm worthy. And I'm just cautious of that. I've learned that, anything chasing ego validation is fickle and fruitful. And for me, chasing intention and purpose is that it never leads me wrong. So yeah, that's a roundabout answer to your question, but I do think we think things happen overnight, and I don't know anybody, I look at the people who I really aspire to be like, or really love what their messages are, the Tony Robbins and the Brene Browns and the Marianne Williamsons, and why I love them is because of their struggle.
True.
I think another thing that I love so much about you is your definition of success. I think you talked about that earlier, and it blew my mind how you're like, success for me is like to be joyful and at peace. It has nothing to do with my job title or anything like that. I really like that about you.
Thank you. And that also was, a hard one, right? And especially going back to those 20-year-old days where it's like, oh, I'll be enough if he chooses me, and I'll be enough if somehow I can just make this much money in my job, or I'll be enough if I have this master's degree even, or I'll be enough if I can one day write a book. And you end up just really living a life chasing sort of ghosts and that kind of energy. And for me, I want to know that I am being used up in this life in the way that I am, meant to. And I want to know that I am doing everything for the right reason. Even if my first thought isn't the right one, I make sure my second one is. And I want to make sure that whatever I'm building is sustainable. And I just trust that, that's why there's no scarcity in my business. Like I send clients all the time to other providers if I think therapy is more important than coaching for them right now. There's more than enough for all of us. And when we live from that mindset, we're freed up to really make an impact rather than being obsessed with what it looks like and what we can get out of it. Now, it doesn't mean I'm not human and I don't have those moments, and doesn't mean like 15 years ago that I wasn't in a lot more of this, but yeah, and I'm more at peace in this way to live. I'm not so hungry for something outside of myself.
You have amazing stories, by the way. Like, no one would guess when they look at you that you really went through any struggle whatsoever. But I love to hear like the totally raw interpretation of the things that got you here. And what comes to mind while you're talking in the few examples you've given is that we've never brought up the concept of the ego on this podcast. And it's something that I am fascinated with and personally putting daily attention towards, because now I see the ego for what it is. It's the many faces of what our mind makes us think our self is. And it's not what most people think of the ego, like your pride. It can be anything, even if it's negative, right? Can you describe like really what the concept of the ego is, Tiffany?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people have different, definitions, but for me, I think the ego is anything that takes you away from trust, from faith, from your true self. Anything that is an attempt to hustle for your worthiness, to make things happen, to shift or control an outcome. So basically for me, anytime I'm acting out of my ego, it's I'm not acting in my faith. So, we think about like ego as narcissism, but ego is self-preservation. Ego is, I need to gossip with this friend to make sure that this other friend really likes me because I'm just trying to survive and I'm trying to belong. So ego isn't always malintended. It's just our best efforts to get our needs met. But it's trying to get those needs met in a way that ultimately doesn't serve us and can over time hurt us. Yeah. So, and coming down into that truth of who am I? What do I believe about myself? What are my core values in this life? And then when we know those things, like I sort of talked about getting clear on in the beginning of my new journal, it's like when we know those things, then we can check our behavior and our thoughts against it. Like, is this actually true? And when I'm behaving this way, does it feel good? I mean, I've gotten to the point, I was talking to a friend yesterday where I can't even gossip anymore. And there's sort of this frustration, right? Because there's something so like ego based about like, oh, did you hear about so-and-so?
Yeah.
And it's not that I'm not human and once in a while it doesn't come out, but like I can't like feel the feeling when I do that feels so yucky because I've gotten to a place where I am so clear on what's in alignment for me and what's not that I like can't even do it for very long, and I usually squash it and make an apology or shift the tone. That's what I mean. It's like when we act out of any of those very human tendencies, that's when we're sort of letting ego run the show.
And it can be a negative ego too. Like we identify with, our depressed self, for instance, right? Like it can be, your ego takes on so many different shapes. It's whoever you are being tricked into believing you are in the moment, right? It's kind of
and all
hard
of the
to
stories
understand.
that come with that, right?
Yeah. I think that's new to a lot of people. I don't think that concept is getting enough attention in all areas of self-development, because when we're seeking better health or to lose weight or to just be less stressed, we don't even realize our mind is doing that to us. And your mind is ran by your ego, isn't it?
It can be if you let it, right? Yeah. And so I always see it sort of like, where are you plugging in? So you need charge to run, just like your phone. And are you plugging into source, whatever that is for you? It doesn't have to be God or higher power. It can be love and truth and justice and what is right. I've worked with people for so long in the field of addiction, like where higher power, it could be anything. It could be nature. But plugging into the greater good and the truth of who you want to be in this life, or plugging into expectation and culture and not enoughness and hustling and all the other things that we are told that if you do this, you will get the outcome you want, and then you will be safe, and then you will be okay, and then you will be validated. So our reasoning for doing this, listen, I believe inherently that most human beings, I think all, are really good. But we get hurt and we get messages and we get learnings in this life that teach us a way to survive that actually hurts us. And so a big part of our awakening and waking up to whatever it is that we want to call into our life is really about unlearning those things and learning where we want to connect to. What power source are we filled up from? One that's sustainable and renewable and ever present, or one that's fleeting and, ego-based. We're getting deep today, man.
We didn't even say the name of your book. Why don't you go ahead and tell everyone?
It's called This Year I Will, a 52-week guided journal to achieve your goals.
And I saw it. It's up for pre-sale on Amazon. Is that right?
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
It is. By the time people hear this, at the end of March 2019, this book is for sale.
Yes, it will be.
And I think something that's kind of fascinating to me when you were talking about the book earlier is the fact that you only have to commit one day a week, right? So it's not like this overwhelming process of, I have to, focus on journaling every single day of my life now for the next year if I've never journaled in the past.
Yeah, and I sort of see it as like if you're hiring a coach or a therapist, and this is in no way meant to be in replacement of that, but like there's something to be said for, I love, the idea of a daily journaling practice, of doing something like morning pages where you do a brain dump before your day even starts. Like that can be done in addition to this. But the idea is sort of to like set your goal, get clear on what you want to create that week, and then reflect. How did I do? Where did I do great? And where did I feel like there was a stumbling block? What's the truth of what was keeping me from doing that? Where were my thoughts positive? Where were they negative? Where was I the happiest? And like just checking in retrospect, that's what you can sort of do over the course of more time, a week.